Good afternoon, Dr. Mofokeng. I am very, very honored that you took some time this afternoon to have a chat with me. So, like I said, when I invited you, actually, the purpose of these conversations, which I'm envisioning to be a series of different PhD journeys, but the purpose behind these conversations is for us to archive and have these conversations as archives that current postgraduate students may find beneficial and useful to help them navigate postgraduate studies, which also happens to be the name of my channel, Navigating Postgraduate with Sims. So I thought about this PhD journey series to have it as a vodcast in this form so that we have them. And like I said, then we can archive them so that they live on the interwebs for forever, actually, right? Unless, of course, you one day ask me to just take it down for some reason, which I hope is never going to be the case. But I'm really thinking it will be exceptionally beneficial to archive these conversations for current postgraduate students to look at the postgraduate journey differently and not to approach it as this incredibly daunting experience that a lot of postgraduate students actually dislike, which we can see ourselves also as supervisors. So thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I'm hoping we have just a free chat and we can just sort of have flexible discourse to bring up interesting insights about your journey. And of course, we'll speak about your PhD study as well, so that postgraduate students could draw some insights in terms of how they could approach methodologically, theoretically speaking, and so forth. But before all of that, I just wanted to say a massive congratulations. You graduated with your PhD. Wanted to know how does that feel and what does this mean to you?
Prof, thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm just honored really to be one of your first guests. I think it's such an important...
My very first guest, actually.
My very, very first guest. What an incredible honor. Thank you so much. This is such an important conversation to have because I know just how difficult it is to get started in the PhD journey, postgraduate journey, period, even with a master's, it would be the same thing. And we have this idea that this is this massive mountain that you can never climb. And I mean, the numbers are there, also the statistics are there. Over 90% of people who start their PhD do not finish it. So I think we need as much assistance, as much advice as possible, open conversations to demystify the journey, and also to inspire and also to make it look fun, because it really is fun. You're asking me how it feels like. I'm still on a high. I still get surprised when people call me Doc, or they say Dr. Mofokeng. I'm like, oh, by the way, that's me. But I mean, there's a huge sense of accomplishment. There's a huge sense of relief that finally it is done. I can tell you that when I started this journey, I thought it was going to take 2 years to do my PhD. It took me double the time. It took me 4 years to complete it. So it has been an incredible journey, life-changing. I have taken up different habits and characteristics. Some of them I wish to shake them off. Like lack of sleep. I need to adjust to the fact that I can wake up at 6. I still cannot. I still wake up at 3 to read and to write. So life has changed, but I think it's for the better. I think, as they say, the early bird catches the fattest worm. So not really complaining.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. You're the 3 o'clock one. I can never relate. I'm not even going to lie. During my PhD journey, I couldn't. People were advising me, sleep super early the previous days, then you can wake up at 2 a.m. I swear, Doc, I could never do the 3 a.m. things. So I absolutely respect people that can. I actually read about it in your acknowledgement section of your thesis when you speak about kicking the duvet, right? Or kicking the blankets at like 3 a.m. to wake up to write or read. A whole lot of respect to people who are able to do that. And one other thing from your acknowledgements actually was the fact that you claim it the fact that you are the most suitable person to have embarked on this particular PhD topic, which we'll get into later as well. Just why do you say you were one of the most suitable people to actually take on this PhD topic, which we'll be getting deeper into later on? What was it about you and the topic and the thematics that you say makes you one of the most suitable people to have taken on this PhD topic?
Well, Prof, I think a lot of PhD people will tell you, or PhD holders will tell you that this was not their original topic. It's quite a few that come up with one topic and see it through to the end. This was probably my fourth. I mean, I tried fourth industrial revolution, I tried AI, I tried COVID, and then I ended up on Solplaki's journalism. And I'm saying that this was tailor-made for me. I was the best candidate for it because we're looking for somebody. The advice that we got from the experts in the field, Brian Willen, Prof. Brian Willen and Sabata Mpomokai, in a webinar told me or told us, the attendants, that there was a need for somebody to read Solplaki's newspaper, along with my supervisor, Prof. Lesley Lehlohonolo. And they had indicated that the person that does this study must be fluent in Setswana. I later discovered that not only Setswana, but also Serolong dialect, to be able to understand the language and be able to actually, write the paper. And I enjoyed it so much because it reminded me of my journalism. I remained curious. I remained interested. The stuff that I found in the newspapers, I was like a kid in a candy store. I felt like I was in an antique store, finding all of these beautiful items, trinkets, forgotten stuff, and things, the heirlooms that come from rich people and whatever, something like that. It felt like a hobby to me. I really enjoyed my approach in terms of data gathering, reading. I read all 283 editions of Solplaki's newspapers, and that's about 2,500 pages, single files. But it never bored me. It never felt daunting. It never intimidated me. I was, in fact, waking up, looking forward to seeing what I'm going to discover, what am I going to read, who am I going to encounter, which story am I going to come across. So the PhD journey was fun in that sense. I really enjoyed that experience of discovery, the excavation of this knowledge, these stories that were written over 120 years ago. And here is somebody reading them 120 years later and finding this gold that is going to turn into something relatable and relevant to an audience of the 2020s.
Wow, that really is fascinating. And as I hear you speak, I love a lot of the positive framing that you cushion when it comes to this topic, right? That you incorporate, because I think I mentioned this to you earlier, that for a lot of PhD holders as well, we hear a lot of the framing is quite negative in the sense that people speak of this highly depressive journey, psychological burden, that things were just terribly bad and challenging throughout. And when I hear you have these positive framings about your journey through the PhD, it first of all affirms me as well with my personal journey, where a significant part of it for me was such a beautiful journey. It was really so positive. And like you, I enjoyed my analysis. I enjoyed engaging the data that I engaged. So I'm just happy to hear that there are more PhD candidates that had a journey that is similar like this, so that it inspires potential and prospective PhD students to not run away, right, from getting the PhD, but also staying aware that it can sometimes get difficult, which I'm sure you also had your difficulties as well, things that we can touch on as well in this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to also hasten to add that, yes, the majority of my journey was really comfortable, was really easygoing. I had a great time, 14 months of reading ancient newspapers. Was really a thrill. It became like a hobby to me. It didn't feel like work. But I mean, what's a PhD without real life challenges? I feel like towards the end of the journey, life threw a lot of things at me. And I think that is part of the preparation. That's the part of the fire that you have to go through so that it can be this beautiful diamond at the end of the process. So towards the end of the journey, life did happen, but I survived. And I think a PhD is way more than just research, way more than just reading and writing and experiments and all of that. Life has to challenge you. Curveballs have to be thrown your way to make sure that at the end of the process, really, you're not the same person.
No, most certainly. And I love why you used the sort of the analogy of becoming this diamond, right? Because I know with diamonds, you start probably as a lump of coal or whatever it is, and then you are put through a whole lot of, fire and so forth to become the diamond that you are. And for you as well, you did not start out being this diamond. So I would love to take this moment for us to go a little bit back, just to get to know, the person behind the title, the doctor title. You can go as far back as you can in terms of history, just to get to know you a bit more, to get a sense of who Lesley Mofokeng is actually, and the journey towards the PhD, especially the academic part of life. You can go as far back as high school even.
Well, I was born in Katlehong on the East Rand, but I grew up in a place called Gelekspan, which is in the town of Ditsobotla in the Northwest, where my grandparents were ministers of the Dutch Reformed Church. I actually wrote about their journey and their life, which was actually my master's dissertation. And it's now a book called The Man Who Shook Mountains. Thanks for the plug. And then from there, the family moved to Mafeking, to the town of Mafeking, where I did my matric at ZM Seatlholo High School. It is in a village about 16 kilometers south of the town of Mafeking. While I was at high school level, my English teacher, Mr. Amos Lesetedi, noticed that I was really great with creative writing, with compositions. I loved languages. I loved English. I loved Setswana. I loved Afrikaans. And then he recommended that I should rather go and study communications at the university. And that's what I did when I got to the Northwest University. And did my BA in communications, my BA communication honors. And then after graduating, I was recruited to join the Sunday Times internship program. That was my first gig. That was my first job ever. And I stayed with the Sunday Times for 12 years, learned a lot of stuff, really put my name out there in the South African media landscape. Gave me an opportunity to get into radio, television, all sorts of platforms as a journalist. But I always maintained that I was a journalist. I was nothing else but a journalist. And then from there, I moved to the City Press. So when I left the City Press, here's the interesting story about my master's journey. In 2005, my grandmother passed away, and her dream was for me to get my third belt, as she called it.
Wow.
And that meant a master's. So I felt so guilty when she died in 2005 that in 2006, I went running to Wits to register for my master's. In 2008, I dropped out of my studies because I was leaving the Sunday Times to go join the City Press. So 2009, I started with the City Press until 2014. And then 2014 to 2019, I worked for the Sowetan. And then we get retrenched in 2009. So that is 10 years after I dropped out of Wits. So I got to Wits in 2019 because I knew that I owed them some money. And I get there and they tell me it was just a small amount. I didn't expect. I settled it on the spot and I registered for my master's. So I really went back to finish my master's in 10 years after I started my master's journey. Wow. And then after that, 2021, I graduated my master's and then stayed on for the PhD. And then I graduated in December 2025. So for the past 6 years, all I've been doing is just studying, reading, waking up in the morning, writing, submitting stuff, attending conferences, taken out of your comfort zone, meeting academics, the imposter syndrome. I don't know if you can see the bags under my eyes from 6 years of studying.
Actually, no, I can't.
There are lines everywhere. No, I tell you. So it has been a journey of resilience, I'd like to think, and determination. I'm so proud that I didn't disappoint my grandparents. My grandfather, who passed away in 2009, always said that I must go to study at Wits. He comes from a rural village in the Free State, not even a village, a farm. We are farm people who worked in the farms, if you know the history of the Free State and black laborers. We come from that kind of background. And my grandfather came to Johannesburg, was the first one in his family to be literate, and went to Tabanchu to study up to standard 6 at Moroka Institution, as it was called at that time. And then came to Johannesburg to work as a laborer. And I can imagine him being in the city and seeing this university and hearing that Mandela goes to that university and seeing all of this prestige that Wits came to represent. And I'm sure he said one day one of my children will go and study there. So when I was in primary school, he used to say, you must go to Wits, your mother must take you to Wits to study. And it never happened because I ended up at the Northwest University at that time. And for me to look back and say that I not only studied at Wits and earned my PhD, but I actually even lecture at Wits is such a story of inspiration that it actually gives me goosebumps. I wish that I hope that my grandfather and my grandmother can see what has become of me and the journey that I have embarked up to so far. And not only them, but the village that I grew up in. I mean, it only got electricity in 2000, in the year 2000.
Oh
All the time while I was a student, we used candles, we used paraffin lamps. We didn't see anything wrong about it. My parents lived in Johannesburg. I used to come to Johannesburg for holidays, but I never really wanted to stay in Johannesburg full time. I really enjoyed the village life. So in the core of myself, my essence, I really am a village boy. I really enjoy the tranquility of the village and the peace that it brings and just the sense of community and all of that. So that is really my journey in a nutshell. There's so much more that has happened in between. But yeah, I started in 2019 with my master's, and here we are 6 years later, sitting with my PhD.
Which really such a fascinating journey as well. And I was listening, I'm thinking, I wish I had such a significant story behind why I ended up at Wits, because I did all my qualifications at Wits, but I unfortunately don't have such a significant story like yours. Mine was just like, I need to get out of the Free State. I want to go to that university that is on TV because Wits used to feature on Home Affairs and on Yizo. I think at some point. So I was like, I want to go to Wits of the TV. That's basically part of my reason. So, but I love that you have such a significant story behind.
That's still significant. That's
linkage.
Fascinating. The power of media and the power of determination. You saw that you got inspired. You went for it and you got it. All your qualifications at Wits. That's huge. Wits for life also.
Thank you very much. But we know it's not about me today. It's about you. And thank you so much for that lovely historic background, right? Which brings us now to the point of the PhD. And this is a subsection of the conversation I call when the seed was planted, right? Us getting a bit of just a bit of a breakdown of some of those events that led to you doing the PhD and choosing the topic that you chose, just in about 5 minutes or so. On your side, what were the significant events that have led to you doing the PhD at Wits, but also then the topic that you chose to do? People, moments that were significant towards that decision.
Okay, Prof, let me try that. You said 5 minutes. Okay, let me see.
Yes.
So I felt like an underachiever for the longest of time. I had an honors degree. I was working for all of these newspapers. I was appearing on TV, on radio, and all of that. And doing all of these things, and everyone used to think that I was successful, and I hated that that word, successful.
We
I never
did.
thought
We really did think you were successful. You
No.
penned a lot of creative writing that we enjoyed. So I think, yeah, you can't blame us. We really thought everything was excellent on your side.
Thank you, but I didn't feel that way. As I said, my grandfather was the first in his family, in the 1930s to be literate, to study up to standard 6. A generation later, his son was the first one to get a PhD in the Netherlands in theology.
Wow.
Professor Takatso Mofokeng, who is a respected Black theologian. He's still around, my uncle. And then came my generation, and we didn't even have a master's graduate in our generation. And I felt so bad about that. I felt like we let the family down because we were a family of education and church. So for the longest of time, I just felt like I'm not fulfilled. I haven't scratched, my full potential. I'm not doing enough. So I think I put myself under pressure to honor my family history, first and foremost. But it was also going to happen on my own terms, at my own time and my own pace. So it so happened that I went to do my master's degree, and I was inspired by the journey of the master's. It was not an easy one, going back to school after probably 15 years after honors. Was intimidating. It was really hard, but it toughened me because it showed me what was possible, and the fact that I shouldn't back down and that I should pursue this, because it really inspired me. There's something about research that sets your soul on fire. Discovery of new information, this excavation that happens, this knowledge, but also you must be naturally curious so that you can satiate the need. So I chased after a PhD because of that. And then I also had people in my life who made it easy for me. I mean, there are people that used to call me doctor, and it used to embarrass me. I thought, I want to be the next Paulo Jordan. I better go get a PhD and not be called doctor when I'm not a doctor. I don't want to be called a doctor when I'm not a doctor. And so some of those things pushed me towards the journey of the PhD. Now, coming to the topic, when I started thinking of the PhD, I thought I was going to do something on AI or the fourth industrial revolution. I actually had conversations with people on the fourth industrial revolution. I also thought I could do something on COVID-19 because my master's journey happened during COVID, 2019, 2020. And at the end of 2021, no, mid 2021, that's when I had to choose a topic. And I said, I'm going to do COVID-19. I submitted my concept paper, already started my literature review. I had read probably 10 books on COVID-19. I was doing this thing. And then there was a webinar. There was a webinar that was hosted by Professor Brian Whelan and Sabata Mpomokai, who are the authorities on Solplaki. Prof. Brian Whelan has been at it since the 70s. And Sabata for many, many years has published so much. They are authorities. So they held this webinar at Wits. At the end of the webinar, I was very active in the webinar. I was asking a lot of questions because, by the way, growing up in the then Buputatswana, the Bantustan, the education curriculum, the curriculum there introduced Solplaki to us at primary school level. So we knew the name Solplaki, we knew superficially just the basics of Solplaki. So I was always curious about this man. I wanted to know more. I felt like I was cheated out of the real story of Solplaki. So any opportunity that came my way that had to do something with Solplaki, I was going to jump on it. So I was participating in this webinar. At the end of the webinar, they said, somebody needs to read Solplaki's newspapers. My supervisor, Professor Lesley Lehlohonolo, said nobody has actually done work on Solplaki from a journalistic background. We've had historians, we've had anthropologists, we've had people touching on the newspapers, but not really a comprehensive magisterial study of Solplaki's newspapers. And then they said the person must know Setswana, must be fluent in Setswana. And all eyes were on me. I just knew that that was my topic. So then I had to abandon this COVID-19 topic that I was warming up to and had already started the literature review on, and start afresh in November
Sure.
2021. That's how I started my journey with this topic. That was hand to glove, or glove to hand. It was just, I mean, people are meshed with their topics sometimes,
Yeah.
by the universe, by the creator, whatever force you believe in. And I think this is my story, that this
Yes.
topic was really tailor-made for me. I fell in love with it. I have so much more respect and understanding of Sol Blackie, and not only Sol Blackie, but the Black communities, the Barolong, the Mafikeng audience, the Tabanchu audience, what was known as Lehatsi Jatsirelecho, which is Protectorate, which is today Botswana. These are the audiences. This is the constituency that Sol Blackie serviced. And reading about, they say journalism is the first draft of history. Reading these articles, reading these letters, and seeing their beliefs, their fears about this colonial dispensation, this government that was being imposed on them, made me respect them so much more. I just feel like a lot of people like to quickly say that our forebears did not do enough. They didn't fight for the land. We lost the land and all of that. But when you read these newspapers, when you see this first draft of history, you have a better understanding of the odds that they faced, but also their determination to hold on to what they believed they deserved, and their honor and their dignity, their boto, their nationhood. So let me leave it there. I think it's over 5 minutes, Prof. Thank you.
And that's absolutely okay. I enjoy hearing these stories. Like I said, they just humanize the PhD journey in ways that I think will inspire current PhD students that might feel stuck, or they might feel like they're supposed to go about this journey in a particular way, which oftentimes is almost this robotic kind of way where you have external expectations of what the PhD journey should be. So we are trying to just humanize the journey to show that the inspirations were these, human inspirations behind this topic, that then becomes this
Prof,
PhD
if you allow me,
thesis. Yes.
If you allow me, apologies. I have just remembered that when you spoke about the people that inspired the journey and all of that, and I mentioned COVID-19. So during COVID-19, Professor Mhlongo ran a series on Instagram about research. And I happened to see the very first post. So I stayed with her from the first episode till the end during COVID-19. And what that series did to me was to demystify the university and to demystify postgraduate studies and the PhD. I must say that a few people have inspired me the way that Professor Mhlongo did. She might not know this, but I was one of those people who sat behind my phone or in front of my phone every Sunday looking forward to the topic of the week. First, it was to help me with my research, my master's research. But then she started talking about the possibilities in the university. What can you do? What's the difference between a professor and a doctor? How do you get to the professor level? And all of these things. And it's just fascinated me so much that I knew that after I finished my master's, I was going to go for my PhD. So I'm mentioning this because sometimes people and students get so overwhelmed that they don't look elsewhere. They don't use social media effectively for their benefit. There are so many accounts that I follow on Instagram and on Twitter that are tailor-made for the PhD journey, that have helped me get to where I am. And it's in addition to what my supervisor is sharing with me. It's in addition to the books that I read in the library, recommended readings from other academics and fellow students and people just who are interested in the journey. But social media has so much power. I mean, for example, this vodcast with Prof. Sims is an example of where you can turn to be inspired, to learn more about this journey that you are on and find the positive. Because most of the time I do see those memes, I do see those jokes on Instagram that can dishearten you, that can make you feel like maybe you're not doing the right thing, because they talk about how gloomy it can be, and how sometimes you should not be doing this, it's not for you or whatever. But you know what you want, you know the seed that was planted in you, and you know what you want to achieve out of this. So once you have your eyes fixed on the prize, make sure that what you consume also feeds the desire to get to the top. Thank you. I just wanted to share that.
Yes. No, thank you very much, because the power of inspiration is really important, right? And sort of helpful, beneficial, positive inspiration. I, similar to you, also used to tune into Professor Pakeng's Sunday sessions. There's another Australian professor, Professor Tara Brabazon. I absolutely love her podcast and vodcast series that she did. I used to watch a whole lot of series, and a lot of them were actually from abroad, which is why I actually felt like we need more local series of this nature, which is, which inspired my own podcast here as well. But yes, all that positive inspiration from people that have walked the journey before really, really does go a long way. I even, far from finishing, I used to watch videos on what do examiners look for. Like, before I even finished, I used to just watch those sort of inspirational videos just to ready myself mentally for some of the expectations on this journey, right? While not losing the sense of being present throughout this journey, right? And speaking of being present as well, I'm going to ask you to walk us through the PhD in, but you can always tackle it the way you want. I would just love for us to touch a bit on, well, the topic itself, which you have now introduced us indirectly to through this conversation thus far. But if we could also touch a little bit just on the context of the study, just a bit of context and background, and we'll get a little bit to methodology as well, or you can weave that into the discussion as you speak through context and background as well, because now we know the inspiration of the study. But if you could spend a few minutes, Doc, just to speak through the topic, the context, the background, and a bit on methodology, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Prof. So the topic changes. I'm sure you've seen this with your own studies. So towards the end, my supervisor thought it would be smart to have something snappy and catchy and sort of to lighten the heaviness of academic speak. So in the end, the sort of prelude or the pre, whatever you can call it, is Solplakis Inc. It's Solplakis Inc., a study of Solplakis newspapers and the form of Solplakis newspapers and how they convened the Setswana public sphere between 1901 and 1915. So the idea, as I said, was to study Solplakis newspapers. So one of the theories that I leaned on was the theory of form. Form means the practical way. How does the newspaper look like? How does it carry the message? How does it carry the content? The use of headlines. Are there images? Advertising or advertisements? The layout, the design, just the structure, just what it looks like. That's the idea or the theory of form. And then the bigger idea, the bigger theory also that I focused on is the theory of public sphere. So if you know anything about the public sphere, you know that it's about Jürgen Habermas, who spoke about the public sphere, the place where there's critical debate for democracy, and the debate happens in these coffee shops and salons in Europe. of the 1800s and all of that. There are people who have come out to criticize Habermas and his framing of the public sphere. People like Nancy Fraser.
And equal citizens always comes up, like this notion of equal citizens getting to discuss, but we know all the biases involved. It's not so equal. Sorry to cut you there.
And that's the point. That's the point Nancy Fraser makes regarding women and the exclusion of women. And I mean, it's such an easy theory to use when you study in the post-colonial sort of line, because that's where I am. And when you look at how Africans were excluded from democracy, there was no franchise. At the time of Sol Plaatje, during the days of Kuranta Batswana, Tsalea Batswana, and Tsalea Batho, the three newspapers, he was based in the Cape Colony, and Black people could vote. Black people had the franchise, which was obviously conditional. It was not the democracy that we know today. You had to have certain things to qualify for the franchise. But the rest of the country was not voting. Transvaal did not have the franchise. Free State was even worse. So when you look at those things, it's so easy then to apply the idea of the public sphere and how Habermas, then you can see all the holes and you can apply it to understand the idea and the concept of the public sphere in the context of South Africa. There's also a theory that I came across earlier in my studies, but I forgot about it, and later on I went back to it. The theory of Afrocentricity, as espoused by Mulifikete Asante, who talks about how African agency has to be front and center. When you talk about African history and African politics and all of that, find the agency. What did the Africans do? And you see this in the letters to the editor in the newspapers. You see this in how the news stories are framed, the columns are written, and all of that. And I felt it was such a perfect fit for my study. So those are the major theories that I used. And I also, obviously now talking about the methodology, I mentioned earlier on that I read 283 editions of these newspapers. The newspapers were printed over.
See why the archive. Now we can see why archiving and the archives are so important, actually.
Well, here's my story of the archive. So when I finally decided that I was doing the Sol Plaatje newspapers, I had obviously planned to go to the Bloemfontein archives, to the Cape Town National Library, Pretoria National Library, and find all of these editions because they were scattered all over the country. At least that's what I thought, or all over the world. And then a few months into my study, there was a presentation from a company called Newsbank that also includes Redex. And they presented the newspapers that they've got this archive of newspapers of African origin. And I didn't think that Sol Plaatje would be in there. I just thought there's no way. I still have to travel. And then lo and behold, I opened the website. There we have about 87 editions of Kuranta Batswana, over, I don't know, almost 200 editions of Tsalea Batswana and Tsalea Batho. And that saved me a lot of traveling, a lot of expenses, because all I could do was just sit on the website, download a page, save it on a folder on my desktop, and then read it. And that's really what happened with me. So as you can imagine, I said 283 editions. In terms of pages, we're looking at over 2,000, probably 2,500 pages that I read from front page to the back. All the adverts, all the stories, make notes of everything. So if you look at my desktop on my laptop, it's just littered with these folders of the newspapers over 15 years. Although there was a gap, the archive is not obviously complete because there's a gap between 1904 and 1909. But the editions are not that many. I would put it at about 50 compared to the 283 that I read. So I've recently found 1904, thanks to Professor Brian Whelan, who went to a School of Oriental and African Studies, or University of London, one of the two, I can't remember well. But he found that the 1904 editions have been digitized and he could download them on a memory stick, and he gave them to me. So as I work on my monograph, I am intending to publish my work as a monograph. I will include 1904, and I'll have more to say about the newspapers. And these newspapers, because it is an academic study, but when I talk to people, they are very much interested in knowing how the world was like back then, and what these ancestors of ours were writing about, what they ate, what they wore, how they spoke. The language of Setswana itself, as I said, is a dialect of Serolong. So I remember coming across this word chwe chwe, but it was written Coe, and I read it as kwe kwe. And I was just like, what can be kwe kwe in Setswana? And I looked at it again. Is it closer? Is it quite? I was like, there's no way it's a click. And then I think when I encountered it for the fourth or fifth time, I realized it's that tswe. So yes, in Setswana, normal Setswana, people would say tswe for please. But in Serolong, it has that accent, that chu. And Solblagi represented that as a Coe, chwe. And this is significant because Solblagi was the first African to serialize his language. The language of Setswana was first written by Robert Moffat in the 1820s. And there are so many errors that were committed, orthographical errors. For example, the place is not Kuruman, it is Kuduman. The desert is not Kalahari, it's Kalahadi. The town in the northwest is not Mariko, it's Madikwe. So when you study how the missionaries interpreted the language and how they represented the language in writing or in print, you can see all of these orthographical errors that got in. And it's because they did not study phonetics. And this is the point that Solblagi himself makes in his 1916 edition called Setswana Proverbs and their European equivalent. And he talks about how, I think it's the other one, it's the other book, it's called the Setswana Reader, that he wrote at the University of London with Professor Jones, where he says, had these missionaries studied phonetics, they would have been able to interpret the language that they were hearing properly and write it properly, and know that the D is a D, is not an R. So I thought that was really fascinating, and I love the fact that I get to see the first draft of the language and how Emorolong would like to represent his language, Serolong, in his own way and correct what the missionaries got wrong. And there are so many other things I can talk about, Prof. I mean, if I were to talk about the themes that come out of these newspapers, I mean, I'm sitting at over
I do. Yes, I would love us to talk about them because you had several lovely, interesting themes.
There's stuff on protest, there's stuff on humor, there's stuff on the social history. One of the favorite columns that I read, or I used to read, I still visit the newspapers even to this day, is called Maronopo Atabanchu. So to Ronopa, I make the connection that it is to sort of gather these things and put them together. And in this Maronopa Atabanchu, you get a sense of a town, the town of Tabanchu, as a citadel of knowledge and vibrancy, and people who go to concerts, who go to tea meetings, they call them tea meetings, who go to church, who attend concerts, who attend concerts, and the kind of music that they listen to, the kind of food that they ate. There are even recipes that are published in these newspapers There's even tailoring, how to design a blouse. This is towards the end, like 1914, 1915. The newspapers cover all of these elements that we take for granted today. But you know, the one thing that I want to say about these newspapers is the fact that we should never think that we're the first people to do a lot of things. History repeats itself. History is alive.